Scott Foster needs to be investigated by the NBA. Now, I wouldn't be making such a claim if I didn't have evidence to prove what I was saying. But how did we get here? The NBA season is over and Scott Foster is really not that relevant right now, or is he? About a week ago, a documentary came out on Netflix about Tim Donaghy and everything that happened with that. For those that don't know, Tim Donaghy was basically betting on the games that he'd be reffing and he'd be helping make people a lot of money, and some people said he fixed the games, which is up for speculation. But what does this have to do with Scott Foster? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, I need to give a little bit of context about Tim Donaghy and how this ties into Scott Foster. Now, I'm going to be referencing some of the scenes from the Netflix documentary. I would highly recommend you watch it. It is very good. Now, full transparency, I was watching the documentary to make a video about the documentary itself and kind of just turning it into a YouTube video and explaining it more for casuals. But there is something that I cannot get over that was said in the documentary. The fact that Scott Foster and Tim Donaghy had about 140 phone calls to each other during halftime of games is very suspicious. But hold on a sec, these guys were really good friends. According to Tim Donaghy's ex-wife, the Fosters would hang out with the Donaghys time and time again. And like NBA players are a brotherhood, so are the referees, so I can understand them maybe having 140 phone calls. But this isn't even my main point. In fact, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, when everything broke out about Tim Donaghy, immediately the NBA refs were under investigation for a while, and rightfully so. In the NBA's investigation, they questioned 60 referees and 52 of them admitted to some form of gambling. Now, this could vary from your run-of-the-mill blackjack game in a Vegas casino or even some sports betting. And I believe only 2 of them were actually involved in betting games that they were officiating. But we don't know who those referees are. In fact, it never came out to the public for a reason that makes so much sense now. Now, one of the people that was actually involved with Donaghy actually made a very good point and basically summed up the entire situation better than anyone else could. The NBA was 48 hours away from being the WWE. Let that sink in. So, of course, when the NBA is in a very bad situation, they want to shut this down as fast as possible. Hence why they never went to court and got this case shut down in less than a week, I believe. If this went to court, this would have been a very bad look for the NBA. But now, this is where Scott Foster comes into play. Now, I brought up the 140 phone calls earlier as a reference that a lot of people say when, oh, Scott Foster is rigging games. I mean, him and Tim Donaghy had 140 phone calls to each other and he was a part of that, blah, blah, blah. But like I said, the 140 phone calls you could easily dismiss as much as you could use as evidence. But let me put it this way. First of all, let's talk about how the NBA itself handled it and David Stern. Now, rest in peace, David Stern's soul, but he was a crock of shit. Probably the most dirtiest commissioner of a league I've ever seen. In fact, when he would talk about Tim Donaghy, he would make him seem like a criminal, a rogue ref, someone that was out to get the NBA. They tried to make him seem like he was crazy and was just lying because of whatever reason. And when you look at it, the fact that you can make one person seem absolutely crazy and most people won't bat an eye. However, if you have 2 or 3 or even 4 more refs come out and say everything that Tim Donaghy said was true, like about the NBA wanting to extend series to 6 or 7 games for marketing reasons, this isn't just a rogue ref anymore. This is a pattern, which again is why the NBA did not want this to go on for too long, because if it did, then some stuff would have came out that they didn't want to. It's also kind of interesting that Scott Foster and Tim Donaghy had multiple calls with each other, their families were hanging out, and yet as soon as everything went down, the two just cut ties immediately. Well, actually, it was more the Fosters cutting ties with the Donaghys. Sure, you can say they were trying to disassociate with each other, but if you're that close, I don't think you would just disassociate with that unless David Stern got involved. But again, that could just be speculation. So what happens when a referee gets exposed for fixing games or betting on games when in reality he was just betting on games as far as I'm concerned? He gets exposed to the public, the media finds out about it, and now the NBA has to make claims about this guy and say he's just a rogue ref. Now, while watching the doc, I'm not gonna lie, there were times where I justified what Donaghy did and how he was innocent in some ways. But then I remembered something and my mind fucking exploded. In the documentary, Tim Donaghy said as a defense that he was in the top 3 in referee percentage calls. I'm not sure how you word that. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that statistically, he was in the top 3 when it came to making the right calls, if that makes sense. Which was his defense for saying that, yeah, I didn't fix these games. I was making the right calls. I was calling what the NBA NBA wanted me to call. But hold your fucking horses because this sounds very familiar. Oh yeah, so does Scott Foster. Also, I have no idea how they even make these rankings, how they even come up with these numbers. Is it voted by the ref? Is it voted by the NBA? I have no clue. So it wouldn't be shocking if the NBA was trying to pump up these numbers, quote unquote, to make them seem like they're actually good at their job. But again, I'm just speculating. I see so many similarities with Scott Foster and Tim Donaghy, it's almost uncanny. And I'm so surprised that Scott Foster did not get taken down with Tim Donaghy when everything went down. Now, let me clarify that in the documentary, they did pull up some news articles, and apparently Scott Foster was not actually guilty according to all the reports. They cleared his name and said he had nothing to do with the betting. However, I made a point earlier where I said, why the fuck would they want to expose anyone else? You adding another referee to this burning ass fire is only going to make things worse. So obviously, there's no incentive for them to take along Scott Foster. And again, what I find so funny is that Scott Foster is still in the league to this day, and Tim Donaghy has basically been banned from the NBA. Also, it seems like Tim Donaghy and Scott Foster had another thing in common. In the documentary, they did talk about Tim Donaghy and the whole Allen Iverson bullshit that happened. According to Donaghy, it was just revenge for another situation that happened with some other refs because I think Allen Iverson like threatened them or something. And again, it seems like these refs are a part of a brotherhood. So Donaghy would give Allen Iverson a bunch of bullshit that game, the Nuggets would lose, and it was just a fuck show. But then I started to compare Allen Iverson to someone else, and again, my mind fucking exploded. It was an undersized guard that talks a lot of shit to the referees, whether it's being toxic or because he knows the rules, who happens to also be African American and has had a lot of problems with a certain referee. Ding ding ding, Raymond Christopher fucking Paul. And if you didn't know, Chris Paul has lost the last 13 playoff games to Scott Foster. That's not a coincidence, that's a fucking scandal. You can't convince me that there's not some correlation as Tim Donaghy and Allen Iverson hate each other and Scott Foster and Chris Paul hate each other. Now, even though I have said a lot of things about the referees being shady and the NBA as a whole, let me just say this. That was David Stern's league and it was definitely shady, and while the NBA definitely isn't not shady anymore because Adam Silver is literally a protege of David Stern, it's definitely gotten better. I think we can say that at least. And most of the referees, as far as I'm concerned, are gone from that era, which was about 15 years ago. If you can take anything away from this video, I think it's the fact that something needs to happen to Scott Foster. We need an investigation. What I think is funny is that it's been about a week ever since the documentary came out, and literally no one has said this about Scott Foster. No one's bringing up these facts. All I've ever seen is the 140 phone calls, which I used in a video a while back, but that was basically my whole argument. And if you're trying to say that Scott Foster should be investigated based off the 140 calls, then I'm sorry, but your argument fucking sucks. You can completely justify that as two friends hanging out, and honestly, you might have a point. But when the NBA investigates refs and they don't say the names that actually did not pass the test, or the fact that the Fosters completely distanced themselves from the Donaghys, or the fact the NBA was doing their best to get the situation over as fast as possible because they didn't want shit coming out, you can't tell me that Scott Foster isn't still doing some shady shit to this day. I feel like it's almost inevitable that Scott Foster is going to be exposed for his dark past, or at least what is currently going on in the NBA to this day.